John?
What?
Hey, is that you?
Dave.
John.
Dave?
Yeah.
Oh, holy cow! Hey,
I know.
What's it been? 15, 20 years?
Well, at least, you know, I
Whoa.
gotta be honest. I thought you were dead. I did. But you died. Huh.
What?
Well, I mean, back in the '80s, I mean, you were in that band, right? What was it called? I just assumed that you crashed and burned. You know, drugs, hookers, weird sex, car accidents, divorce, lawsuits.
No,
you know, maybe a murder or two. I don't know.
No. I retired.
I mean,
I retired.
That's the way you guys lived hard. You know, that's the way you were. Yeah, you burned brightly for a couple of years, and then it all collapsed. You know, into a big stinking pile of broken dreams, ruined lives, and empty bank accounts.
No. I was pretty careful with my health, and I had some good financial advice.
Let's face it, this very conversation is a miracle. I mean, considering how your kind operate, I mean, you must feel very, very lucky that you're able to stand here talking with me right now. I mean, don't you think?
I guess.
Yeah, I guess is right. Yeah. So what's up? What are you doing? Tell me. Talk to me.
The band's back together. We're
Really?
pleased with that. Yeah, we have a new record deal with a boutique label, and we're going to cash in on the lucrative retro market.
Very cool.
My accountant figures we stand to gross close to $5 million by the end of the year, which can be used to expand my real estate and new media portfolios. How you doing?
Well, during the day, I talk. I mean, I've always been a people person, so I like to get out there in the field, and I really like to communicate and find out what people want. You know, it's a consumer preferences type job, really.
You're phoning people up asking to get their ducks blown out?
A little.
Now, the ongoing history of new music.
The Cure, live in Toronto during the summer of 2004. That tour and that year's self-titled album let millions of people know that the band, which had been around in one form or another since 1976, was still very much alive. The album wasn't what you call a huge seller, which was a bit of a disappointment to their label, but the tour was huge and grossed millions, proving that, yes, there is still a gigantic market for old new rockers. Wow, old new rock. What an oxymoron. Well, maybe on the surface, but the reality is that this is big business. Hello again, I'm Alan Cross, and this show is about retro and reunions and recycling with a touch of where are they now thrown in. The whole new rock and alternative rock genre has been around long enough that many of the scene's elder statesmen and women, the people who started it all back in the 70s, are now in their upper 40s or lower 50s. And some, like David Bowie and Lou Reed and Iggy Pop, are closing in on their 60s. Others, like Joe Strummer of The Clash and three-quarters of the original lineup of the Ramones, have already shuffled off this mortal coil and joined the choir invisible. But there's a select group who have survived long enough that, just like that old shirt in the back of the closet, they've come back into style, even if it's just briefly. Now, The Cure is a great example. They effectively disappeared for a while. But when a lot of today's bands started name-checking them as important influences, Robert Smith decided to resurrect the group one more time. They found a label who agreed and signed them up, and much to the surprise of a lot of observers, there were tens of thousands of people willing to part with substantial amounts of cash to line up and see The Cure one more time. And they're hardly alone. Look at some of the tours and CDs and reunions that we've seen since the start of the century. There's been The Cure, and Echo and the Bunnymen, and Morrissey, and Duran Duran, and Tears for Fears, and, Motley Crue came back, for God's sake. Now let's start by examining this whole fascination with retro and the basis for all these reunions. Shouldn't we be done with the 80s by now? Is there a retro 90s thing coming soon? How many radio stations run retro programs? Why are there still so many retro CDs in the stores? Why do we still get reruns of shows like I Love the 80s? Why do TV shows like The OC use retro songs as part of their soundtrack? Why are retro-tinged movies like The Wedding Singer and Grosse Pointe Blank still big favorites? And while we're at it, how is it that bands like The Cure and Morrissey and New Order are still working? Old bands are big business in the new century. There are a lot of people who want to buy what they're selling. We need to begin with a little pop psychology so you can understand why so many people are still fascinated by music from artists such as this.
Irish blood, English heart, this I'm made of. There is no one on earth I'm afraid of. And no regime can buy or sell me. I've been dreaming of a time when to be English is not to be painful, to be standing by the flag, not feeling shameful, racist or partial. Irish blood, English heart, this I'm made of. There is no one on earth I'm afraid of. And I will die with both of my hands untied. I've been dreaming of a time when the English are sick to death of Labour and Tories and spit upon the name Oliver Cromwell and denounce this royal
All right, what I'm about to say is probably going to hurt, especially if you look around and you find yourself with a spouse and a couple of kids and a mortgage and a student loan that just won't go away. You are getting old. And as every generation of music fans gets older, and as the baggage of your life piles up, there will be an inevitable pining for the music of your youth. And it doesn't matter how progressive you and your generation used to be. At some point in your life, you are going to display a preference for the music you loved when you were younger. You will at some point think to yourself, wow, music was so much better back in the day. It may be a conscious thing or it may be an unconscious thing. But this preference will manifest itself in your life. And don't worry, because it is completely normal and natural. There's a period in everyone's life where people come of age musically. It usually extends from sometime in the middle teens through to your early 20s. These are the special years when you suddenly get music, and this whole universe suddenly opens up to you. And the music you discover during those years will be imprinted on your brain forever. You will forever associate that music and those performers with your experiences and emotions of that time in your life. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you will stop appreciating any new rock that comes along as you get older. But the music of your coming-of-age period will forever hold a unique place in your heart. And when an opportunity comes to, well, exhume those emotions and memories that this music prompts, you will do it because it feels good. And consciously or unconsciously, you may feel a little younger and a little nostalgic and maybe even comforted, if just for a little while. And it's okay, because everybody feels this way. This is why Duran Duran reunion shows were mauled by former Duranis from the 80s. It's why so many people hired a babysitter so mom and dad could go hear The Cure sing Let's Go to Bed One More Time. And it's why Motley Crue can command and get $250,000 per show on their reunion tour. They're getting $250,000 per gig. And it's why there's still enough interest in Billy Idol for him to release a new album, even though it's 2005. Billy Idol, one of the original punk rockers from the 70s, who decided at the age of 49 to give it one more shot. And you know something? Old school fans loved him for it. Concert promoters love older performers too, simply because if done properly, they can charge big dollars for tickets. See, older rock fans are more likely to have more disposable income than younger ones, and that means the chances of them shelling out $50, $75, $100, or even $250 for a single concert ticket are actually pretty good. In other words, old is where the real money is for both the promoter and the performer. If you look at the stats for concert ticket grosses, and I have some figures here from 2004, half of the top 10 grossing concert tours were staged by people over 50. 2 are over 60. We're talking about people like Elton John and Phil Collins and Simon and Garfunkel. And check this out. Only one group in this top 10 had an average age under 30. Any guesses who that was in 2004? Linkin Park.
Make some noise if you can help us out on this next one. You want to help us out? Keep singing those words, people. You guys sing with Chester, come on. It starts with one thing. I don't know why. Doesn't even matter how hard you try. Keep that in mind. I designed this rhyme to explain in due time. All I know, time is a valuable thing. Watch it fly by as the pendulum swings. Watch it count down to the end of the day. The clock ticks life away. It's so unreal. Didn't look out below. Watch the time go right out the window. Trying to hold on, but didn't even know I wasted it all just to watch you go. I kept everything inside, and even though I tried, it all fell apart. What it meant to me will eventually be a memory of a time when I tried so hard and got so far. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. I had to fall to lose it all. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. One thing, I don't know why. Doesn't even matter how hard you try. Keep that in mind. I designed this rhyme to remind myself how I tried so hard. In spite of the way you were mocking me, acting like I was part of your property, remembering all the times you fought with me, I'm surprised that it got so. Things aren't the way they were before. You wouldn't even recognize me anymore. Not that you knew me back then, but it all comes back to me in the end. I kept everything inside, and even though I tried, it all fell apart. What it meant to me will eventually be a memory of a time when I tried so hard and got so far. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. I had to fall to lose it all. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. Come on, you guys, let's hear it right now. I put my trust in you, pushed as far as I can go. For all this, there's only one thing you should know. I tried so hard and got so far. In the end, it doesn't even matter. I had to fall to lose it all. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. Thank you.
So that's rather interesting. All the big concert money revolves around older artists, which helps explain why so many older bands continue to reunite. They want to try and get a piece of this huge pool of potential concert ticket revenues. And yes, many of these reunited groups release some new material before they head out on the road. But those new CDs are really just a token gesture, a flimsy excuse for a comeback. Few fans want to hear new, unfamiliar stuff. They just want to hear the big hits. And here's a shock. These new albums, when they're released, they almost always sell poorly. Reunions almost never result in new hit albums. Fans will buy tickets to the tour, but they don't care about the new album. In other words, even the biggest reunion probably won't mean much to the record label because, well, we're just not buying. Hey, did you run out and buy the new CDs from Duran Duran or Tears for Fears? No, me neither. Sales for both projects were slight, hardly worth the effort of the label that signed them. The cold, hard fact is that they just can't compete in the CD marketplace. There's no place for them on the radio, in the stores, or in the hearts of fans. But playing a gig featuring all the old hits, well, now you're talking. All right, so what makes for a successful reunion? Well, if you're in a formerly famous band, there are 4 filters that you should pass through before it's a good idea to let the waistband out on those old leather pants one more time. First of all, first filter, is everyone still alive? It's kind of pointless to reunite if one or more of your key members are dead. Just ask the surviving members of The Doors who tried to get it going without Jim Morrison. At last word, he's still dead and has been that way since 1971. Second, you got to present yourself in a way that fans will remember. You got to look and act and sound and dress the way you did back in the day. After all, after the fans spend big dollars for tickets to your reunion show, there's a certain expectation there. Your job is to take them back to when you were at your peak, and when they were at their peak, too. Third, admit to yourself that you're really doing it for the money. Understand that no one is really going to give a rat's ass about the new album. You can release one if it makes you feel better, but it's really not required. In fact, it's probably an unnecessary expense. Take the cash and top up the retirement fund, take care of some bills, and pay off those old dealers who have been threatening to break your legs for the last decade. Finally, you got to get your timing right. Rock goes in cycles with various forms of older music going in and out of style. If you mount a comeback and people aren't ready to buy, well, then that dealer will still be looking to break your legs. Let's look at an example. Gang of Four was a very political punk-funk outfit from the UK whose sound predated such pioneers as the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They were very left-wing in their sounds and deeds and politics. And in January 2005, they launched a reunion tour. The first shows by the original lineup in 2 decades. All right, so let's go through these filters. Are they all alive? Check. Do they look and sound the same as they did back in the day? Well, they're a little older and the clothes seem a little sharper, maybe a bit tighter, but yeah, check. Have they acknowledged that they're in it for the money? Well, ticket prices for the shows have been pushing $50, so they seem to be cool with that. And is the timing right? Hard to say. Have you heard the general public clamoring for a Gang of Four reunion? Old-school punk fans thought that the idea was great, but, there really weren't that many Gang of Four fans to begin with.
Time with my girl, I spent it well. I had to be strong for my woman. You must be joking, already must be joking. She needed to be protected. The good life was so elusive. Handouts, they got me down. I had to regain my self-respect. So I got into camouflage. The girls, they love to see you shoot. I love a man in a uniform. 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 To have ambitions was my ambition.
All right, so that covers the older end of the new rock audience. We're talking about recapturing youth and recapturing some happy memories. Promoters know that these people have big bucks to spend on the occasional concert, and performers who aren't ready to call it a day. But this doesn't explain why so many young people still in their coming-of-age phase, are into older music and some of alternative rock's elder statesmen and women. We'll look at that whole thing next.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
Welcome back. I'm Alan Cross, and you can call this show I'm Not Dead Yet. We're examining the logistics of the band reunion and the public's fascination with retro. Traditionally, mainstream baby boomers have their own brand of retro. Much of it is rooted in the 60s and 70s. They get all misty-eyed and nostalgic for the days when they were young and radical. But what if you're a member of Generation X, that whole group that followed in the shadow of the baby boom? Gen X looks at retro much differently. Most baby boomers used the music of their youth to recall a time when things were much better. In their minds, at least. Gen X came of age when things weren't very good. Front and center in their formative years were things like a deep recession, the Gulf War, scads of divorced parents, and the AIDS crisis. Their musical icon, Kurt Cobain, fell into a deep depression and killed himself. The result of all this is a generation that had to grow up very quickly, which means they're really not that well grounded in their youth. Bottom line, while nostalgia is a great thing to sell to the baby boomers, it's not nearly as effective with Generation X. Now, this does not mean that Gen X people aren't interested in retro. It's just that they're very particular about it. Rather than being marketed to, Gen Xers carefully pick and choose their old music. There has to be a certain irony, a wink and a nod. This is fun, but we're not really serious attitude involved, which helps explain why the retro 80s thing won't end. Hey, ever notice that the biggest and most enduring retro hits among Gen Xers are the campiest, most theatrical, and often most dated sounding?
Sometimes I feel I've got to run away. I've got to get away from the pain you drive into the heart of me. The love we share seems to go nowhere, and I've lost my light. For I toss and turn, I can't sleep at night. Once I ran to you, now I run from you. This tainted love you've given, I give you all a boy could give you. Take my tears and that's not nearly all. Tainted love, tainted love. Now I know I've got to run away. I've got to get away. You don't really want any more from me to make things right. You need someone to hold you tight, and you think love is to pray. But I'm sorry, I don't pray that way. Once I ran to you, now I run from you. This tainted love you've given, I give you all a boy could give you. Take my tears and that's not nearly all. Tainted love, tainted love. Don't touch me, please. I cannot stand the way you tease. I love you though you hurt me so. Now I'm gonna pack my things and go. Tainted love, tainted love, tainted love, tainted love. Touch me, baby, tainted love. Touch me, baby, tainted love. Tainted love. Tainted love. Tainted love.
Soft Cell with their massive 80s hit Tainted Love. And yes, they got back together a few years ago, complete with some new material. Oh, you missed that. By the way, Sofstel is still around in some capacity, but their status is shaky because singer Mark Almond was involved in a motorcycle crash in London in October of 2004. He was the passenger on a bike that hit a car. He was in intensive care with head injuries and had to undergo a bunch of operations. The good news, though, is that he has pulled through. Some reunions do work for Gen Xers. Take the situation with the Pixies. They earned about $14 million on their 2004 reunion tour. If you saw any of the shows, you'll know that the crowds were a mix of the baby boomers, who were into alternative rock back in the late 80s, and younger people who grew up listening to bands who constantly reminded everyone that they were inspired and influenced by the Pixies. And that includes Nirvana and the Smashing Pumpkins and a million other grunge-ish lo-fi bands. So all the tickets disappeared very quickly, and the Pixies weren't dumb. They released a new greatest hits album to go along with the tour. See the band? Buy the record. Right. Got it. Oddly enough, though, it didn't work out that way. Sales for the greatest hits CD were disappointing. And did you know that the Pixies released a new song in 2004? Yeah, the first new material from the Pixies in more than a decade. Wow, cool. Oh, no one cared. Yeah, all anybody wanted was the big hits from the glory years. Hey, what was the name of that Pixie song from late 2004? No, I don't. Why would I ask if I knew what it was? You don't know. I'll just play something from one of the shows.
Outside by the boxcar waiting, outside the family store, out by the fire breathing, outside we wait till the face turns blue. I know the nervous walking, I know the dirty legs, out by the boxcar waiting, take me away to nowhere place. Is the way so long? Here comes a man. Here comes a man. Here comes a man. Big shake on the boxcar moving. Big shake to the land that's falling down. As the wind makes the palms stop blowing, a big, big storm falling break my crown. Is the wait so long? Never wait so long. Here comes your man. Here comes your man. Here comes your man. Here comes your man.
The Pixies, back in April 2004 on their big reunion tour. Lots of tickets sold, traffic in the record stores, not so much. So, to sum up Gen X and their attitude towards retro, they'll take it only when they want it and on their own terms. The music of their youth is a diversion and definitely not necessarily a need. Using nostalgia as a selling tool probably won't work. Big difference from the baby boomers. When we come back, we'll do a little Where Are They Now prospecting. Hold on.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
Let's finish up by throwing out some names so we can settle up their current status. It's a little Where Are They Now exercise. The Happy Mondays were one of the most important English bands of the late 80s and early 90s. There was one reunion a few years ago because the group had such a large tax bill they needed to earn some cash and fast. In recent years, the most visible member of the band has been Bez, the band's dancer. He was seen on a TV show called Celebrity Big Brother in the UK, battling out against other C and D-list celebrities to see who could last the longest living together in a house filled with closed-circuit cameras. You know, one of those reality TV shows? Chances of another Happy Mondays reunion? Well, it all depends on how those tax bills are going, I guess. And from what I've heard, there really isn't a lot of money left over from those glory years. And how about the Jesus and Mary chain? They were one of the more influential British indie groups of the 80s. Where did they go? Well, the chain bounced from label to label in the mid-90s before William Reed decided to call it a day in 1999. He then moved to the States, where he recorded and released albums under a variety of names. Jim was last seen in a group called Free Heat and on a solo tour about 2 years ago. He also helped his sister Linda with an album. Chances of a reunion? Well, at this point, not good.
Since I get my head round you, color and catching sparks of you, get an electric charge from you, a second-hand living it just won't do. Anyway, I feel tonight, oh, I could die and I wouldn't mind. And there's something going on inside.
The Jesus and Mary Chain with Head On from 1989. And since we're on a bit of a deity kick, whatever became of Jesus Jones? Well, they filled a nice niche for a while in the time between Manchester and Britpop. And they had some major hits, too. Whatever became of them? They released 3 albums in the early 90s and were ready to release a 4th when their record company rejected it. At that point, the band fell apart for a few years before they made another attempt in 1997. But just as they were about to release that CD, their record company went bankrupt and everyone scattered again. There was another reformation in 2001, but don't feel bad if you missed it because everyone else on the planet did too. Mike Edwards, the singer, spends most of his time mountain biking. 3 of the other guys are working with other bands in various capacities. And the keyboard player? Last I heard, he was doing this, working as a DJ for a radio station in London. Prospects for another Jesus Jones reunion? Probably not good. Good thing they keep relicensing this song for TV commercials. That keeps the money rolling in. Jesus Jones with their big hit from 1991, and a top producer when it comes to being sold for use in TV commercials. That's right here, right now. One more. Anyone remember Portishead? They were a major component of the trip-hop movement that emerged in the middle 90s. Their first album, something called Dummy, was absolutely huge. It sold a ton, won a bunch of awards, and set the tone for the rest of the trip-hop world. Here, let me remind you. This is called Sour Times. Portishead with Sour Times, one of a couple major trip-hop singles from their 1994 debut album called Dummy. So whatever happened to them? Well, the two principals in the band, singer Beth Gibbons and arranger and programmer Jeff Barrow, were always media shy, so we never got to hear much about them when they were around. There was a second album in 1997 and a live record in 1998, and that was pretty much it. Prospects for a reunion? Excellent, actually. Jeff Barrow maintains that they've only had their heads down. Portishead had never broken up or split up or whatever. In fact, in early 2005, he said that a new CD, the first Portishead record in 8 years, was almost ready. Back with a few final things in just a second.
You're tuned to the ongoing history of new music. This is the ongoing history of new music.
So, what do we know when it comes to retro and reunions? Well, it works better with baby boomers than it does with Generation X people. The jury is still out on what Generation Y will cling to as they grow older. Chances are, though, that they'll have even less of an affinity to the music of their youth than Gen X. That's because this generation has more things to keep them occupied and distracted. Things like video games and the internet, a million more TV channels, that kind of thing. Secondly, music is much, much more fragmented than it's ever been. Thanks to technology, the choice in personal soundtracks is pretty much infinite. In the future, it's going to be tough for marketers to zero in on the kind of music that's going to make Gen Y people excited about their younger days. As for bands, well, you can do well with a reunion if you admit why you're really doing it and if you get your timing right. Otherwise, you can pretty much forget it and go back to work at Starbucks. Meanwhile, more will keep plotting and trying to find a way to get one more kick at that music career. Some will make it. Some won't. Whatever the case, you got to admit it's kind of fun to keep score, isn't it? Technical production is by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to The Ongoing History of New Music, a Deep Sky production.